No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about an article that I saw on LinkedIn about a week ago called The Emotional Crumbling of Leaders. It was written by Dan Ponifract, and we'll link to the article in the podcast description. But I thought it was a really well-written article on how leaders' expectations, or the expectations of leaders, have changed over the years, and how a lot of leaders are kind of sacrificing themselves for their teams in ways that they, A, didn't think they'd ever have to do, B, aren't really prepared to do, and C, aren't cut out for. Like they're just long-term aren't cut out for, not because of any lack of training, but because no one is. No one is cut out to do or should be expected to do a lot of these things. It's a very kind of an interesting take on the emotional needs of people and how leaders have to show up in order to kind of live with those emotional needs of not just themselves and their personal lives and their families, but the team members that report up to them and the personal lives and family members of all those team members.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a carry on some of the conversations we've had before and a lot of other articles that I've been seeing, which is around like kind of the idea of middle management and like where a lot of this is kind of landing, and the amount of pressure kind of from both sides of a workforce that's kind of demanding more of leadership, and then higher level leaders that are demanding more of the leaders when it comes to either expectations or goals or whatever. So it's kind of like there's, I think now more than ever, this amount of pressure kind of in the middle of, in an example of people saying like, well, I want this from my manager, for my company, whatever, for my job. And then the leader saying, okay, let me see what I can do, try to figure that out, and then go to get to the support. And it's like, well, we can do this, but we can't do that, or we can adjust this, or we can't have that, or this is the reasons why we can't do it. And then kind of like, then going back to the person and be like, well, this is kind of what the options are. And the person's like, well, this doesn't work for me. And then they leave. And then the company's like, well, why are people leaving? Like it's just this ongoing element of a lot of things going on. And quite a bit of it is landing right there in leaders of leaders, in middle management, in those spaces. So, I think this is a good topic to talk about. I think it's going to be something that we're going to be talking about continuously, because if we're going to continue to ask more of our leaders, that's great. We just have to be able to also offer our leaders a level of training, support, and places where they can have what they need to be able to show up for our people that way.
Right. I think about, when I was growing up, I had serious knee problems because of how fast I grew in height. And I'd have surgery on my knee a couple of times. And I remember days where my legs were in so much pain that I wanted to cry, and I'd just like lay on the couch with like a heating pad or an ice pack or something, between the ages of, call it like 10 and 14. And now I don't have that anymore. Everything's fine now. And before it started, everything was fine. And it was these growing pains in the middle that were in hindsight, I guess, necessary to get through that and get past, where I was. This is no different. I think where we are headed is ultimately good for the workforce, headed to a place where the employee experience, the balance between work and life and emotional needs and personal needs and work needs, where that is all taken into account for every employee. I think that is a good place to get to. Before we had that as even a North Star or a goal to get to, and it was just kind of driven by performance and numbers and the work, we didn't experience any of these growing pains because the people who expressed that this was important to them were cast off the island. Like, nope, this isn't. You don't get that here. Get to work, right? And the tide swelled, and now more people care about this kind of goal of emotionally healthy employees that leads to productive employees. But we are in that 10 to 14-year-old growing pains on the couch in pain at night stage where we kind of mostly collectively agree it's the right place to get to and that we have to get there, but we don't necessarily know how to get there yet completely. And we don't have the skills necessary to get there. And so it's going to be a period of years where we go through this until the dust settles. And when I say go through this, I mean people continually looking for new jobs because they feel like their current job isn't meeting their emotional needs or allowing them the flexibility and freedom that they need. And so they leave only to go to the next job to find that they feel the exact same thing about the next job. And it doesn't mean that their expectations are too high, although sometimes they are. Sometimes their expectations are too high. It could mean that the places that they're trying, that the leaders there, the leadership there, the culture there just isn't equipped to handle it yet. It doesn't mean they won't get there, though. It just means that they have these growing pains. And I think a lot of employees who can kind of see through that and know the difference between an organization who is not meeting the emotional needs of leaders or of employees because they don't care about it versus an organization who is not good at meeting these emotional needs and balance needs of employees and leaders because they just aren't good at it yet, but they're trying. I think that is going to come to light. You'll see a divergence when it comes to the organizations who at least are committed to trying, even if they're failing over and over again. But there's going to be a lot of people that fall through the cracks in the meantime, and a lot of leaders who burn out in the meantime because of it.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. I think that I think that what will end up happening is that if you've got leaders in these spaces where they have a talent, they're very passionate about their people, they want to do the right thing, they're fully invested in doing what the organization's asking them to do, and then doing it in a very caring way, where they are they're using their emotions and their passions and their loyalty to an organization to help to bring people along. I think what you just called out was that it's going to be more and more apparent with the organizations and the companies that are doing it with the intent, and they're trying, and it's the right intent, and they want to do the right things, and they're constantly looking at and making adjustments and pivoting to figure out what's the right balance for all of that, versus the organizations that just clearly show that they necessarily don't care whatsoever, that it's not a topic for them, that it's just a matter of like, let's just keep this thing moving. And I think as we see leaders move from organizations to organizations, I think that's what's going to end up happening is that the companies that have put no effort, are having no conversation, are not considering just kind of like the taking of the emotional energy of their leaders. If they're not considering any of this, if they're not doing anything to figure this out, to talk about it, to provide resources or training or whatever that might be, for those companies that are doing none of that, they're going to see, I think, a lot of leaders moving on and going to other companies where, again, to your point, even if they're not there yet, they're continuing to make attempts to do the right thing in this space. I think that's going to happen. And I think it's going to be, another one of those situations where I think companies are going to be forced to do some things differently and to change out potentially senior leadership if they're not doing these types of things now, haven't considered these things, not talking about these things. And then as that happens, then there might be a shift and change in the culture there. But I really think this is a top of mind topic in companies, industries, and organizations where you have these multiple layers of leadership. And where is that falling? Like it's never ever completely spread out. It's never an even spread of responsibility, because some people are just going to be always closer to the actual work. And when you're the closest to the actual work, you also take on a lot of those things that bring about kind of stress and and pressure and things like that. So I just think that it's a topic that I think is going to be top of mind for a while now, and that you're going to find leaders and organizations that are going to not only look to solve it, but they're going to start to share what it is that they're doing to bring this to life and to make this happen, so that it can be helpful in other places.
Right. There's also lack of an equal share of the distribution because of kind of self-selecting. Like there are leaders who self-select to be more a part of this because they know that it's important. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have what it takes to do it. It just means they care enough about it to make the attempt. And I think this article, talks about leaders who are stressed out and burned out and exhausted. And there's a lot of data that it cites around shouldering the emotional needs of their employees is leading to a lot of this. I think about my wife at the end of the day of a long day of 3 kids where they've been exceptionally jerky for the day, and she comes home, and if I come home and if I start talking to her about anything that is like an emotional need of mine, and it seems like she doesn't want to hear it. Well, it's because she spent the last 15 hours dealing with the emotional needs of 3 other people, and at the expense of her own emotional needs. And so there's nothing left. And I think that a lot of leaders are in the exact same boat. They give all of this to their people and there's nothing left for them, and then they burn out. But I will say something. I heard from a leader that I had a long time ago that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. And it was in the context of, this was not a good leader, by the way. The context of yelling and screaming and telling me what I should be doing better and different. And I kind of got incensed that they were speaking to me that way. They said, "You're lucky that I am speaking to you that way. What you need to be worried about is when I stop caring enough to say something to begin with, and I just move on. And it's the apathy that is the opposite. It's like, so don't do that." But he wasn't wrong in that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. Meaning the leaders who are burning out because of this, they're burning out because they care about it. They care about it enough to do it. And I'll tell you, in a lot of organizations, a lot of the leaders who aren't burning out, it doesn't mean that they're equipped to handle this. Sometimes they are, and that's great. And those leaders should be lauded for their abilities to be able to do this. But there are a lot of leaders in a lot of organizations who they don't care about doing this, and they're not burnt out by it because they're not putting any effort into it. They're just going about their day, doing things the way they've always done it, because they don't want to make the changes necessary, because they're not prepared to do it, and they don't want to burn out, and they see their peers burning out by trying to do it, and they just want to tread water until it's time to retire, until it's time to leave. And those kind of placeholder managers that I put it are just as big a detriment to an organization as the ones who are trying to do this work and are burning out, maybe even more so, because they're not getting employees what they need, but they're also not vacating roles that would open up the spots for newer people to come in. And they're not making an attempt to find that balance. They're not making an attempt to get through it and help their people get through it. I think that's something to keep in mind. Just don't think that just because a person it seems to be getting through this, it doesn't mean they're doing the hard work. It just means that they're good at doing it, or they're not even trying.
Yep, absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1-minute hack, here's what I want you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to write down everything you've done in terms of self-care for the last 30, 60, 90 days. If you're looking at me going, "What do you mean, self-care?" Then there's a problem. So if you can fill that paper, then you're already on the right track. A lot of leaders who are feeling burnt out and tired and exhausted because of the attempts to shoulder the emotional needs and well-being of their people, they aren't doing anything in terms of self-care to prevent that from happening. You are no good to anybody unless you take care of yourself. It's the old put your oxygen mask on before you put on the oxygen mask of your kids next to you, because once you pass out, you can't help anybody. This is the exact same thing. If you start looking at this situation from a standpoint of you need to keep burning the candle at both ends, working 16-hour days, doing whatever you can because no one else will in service of your employees, because you feel like you need to be there for your employees. If eventually you burn out because of it, you aren't being there for your employees. That's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is make sure you put enough into self-care, make sure you put enough into your own balance so that when you are there for your employees, you are there in the right space to be able to help them do it. You're much more capable of giving the right advice, of being able to shoulder those needs, of being able to help employees get through things they need to get through, and making sound decisions, good judgment decisions on things related to the nuance of leadership and how to treat employees when they're going through things. You're much more likely to be able to do that well if you are well rested and if you have self-care and if you're emotionally balanced in your own life. The person who is the most stressed out and exhausted shouldn't be the one making leadership decisions for their people. So take care of yourself first, and you'll be able to take care of your people.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and just a reminder. I think that taking the time to just to recenter, to rest, to be able to just enjoy some things, I think is such an important part of leadership and of self-leadership, especially when you're responsible for other people. I know that, again, if you're listening to this podcast right now, right, if you are taking the time to invest in yourself, to consider what you can do to help your leadership, help gain perspective, that type of thing, then I'm sure you're going to have a couple of things on that piece of paper. Like, I would just imagine that. I think that sometimes people get trapped in, I don't have time for anything but my job. Or they have this idea that, like, if I'm fully committed to the job, if I work constantly, if I burn myself out, that's what it takes to get to the next level. That's what it takes to get to the next promotion. And you don't even have time for podcasts like this. So what I would tell you, and hear me very clearly, if you're one of those that is taking the time to listen to this podcast, or if you know somebody who is, that is not doing this, they're not taking, send this podcast to them, say, just listen to this and take the time, right? Take more time, really consider what it's going to take to help you to gain that bit of rest, to really to clarify what's going on. There are times in my career, and I know Chris feels the same way, where like there was no option but to work really hard, to put in a lot of hours. We were very passionate about the work. There were things that wanted to get done. It wasn't so much like an abuse of power per se by any individual. It was our own commitment to wanting to do the work that we wanted to do. And it was a lot, and it was very tough. And it was stressful and all those types of things. What I could share with you is that it helped to define for me that there will be times when you have to do that. There will definitely be times in your career where it's like, put your head down and go do the work. And like, you're going to have to prioritize what needs to get done to get through this moment. And as long as those things continue to be moments, then you'll be all right. They cannot be your regular. They cannot be the normal. There cannot be this element of like, it's always this hard. I'm always this busy. I never have time. There has to be those moments, and then you should have the time to really kind of to either rest or to have a little bit less on your plate. It's when you're constantly having your plate, filled with things, and then as soon as you make a dent in it, it gets filled with more. That can be a really, really tough place to be in, and it can be really hard to get yourself out of it.
Right. The last thing I want to say about this is that the worst career decisions that you will ever make are when you are running from something. The best career decisions you make are when you're running towards something. And so a person who is looking for a new job, who's looking for a new role, who's trying to kind of level up in their career, take on new responsibilities, new challenges, a person who does that, who is already content in their current job, is likely to make the right decision in terms of, should you take this new offer or not? Or did the interview feel well? Are you showing up in the right way to that interview process? Those will go better than a person who is really desperate to get out of the current situation. If it gets to the point where you're desperate to get out of the current situation, if you're running from your current situation, you will likely run into the arms of another situation that is just as bad or maybe worse. The people I know who are happiest at their jobs are the ones who during the interview process, they didn't show up trying to be someone different, trying to put this like the best foot forward. They put an authentic foot forward. They showed up as they actually, who the person they actually is. And when that worked out, they thought, you know what, this is the organization for me because I can show up at who I actually am. The people who go to job interviews and go through these processes, and they try to be someone different than who they are, and they try to put their best foot forward and keep up appearances, so to speak, and fluff their resume up, and all those things. You start the relationship out from a standpoint of feeling like you have to live up to this, I don't want to say lie, but this facade you created during the process because you were so desperate to get out of where you were coming from. So get your house in order in terms of where you are, and get to the point where you can at least hang where you are in terms of being able to go through the process of leveling up in your career. Don't run from anything, run towards something.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.